At exactly 10:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message that should have broken me, but instead it changed everything. Don't contact us. Don't come around. You're on your own now. No warning, no explanation, just a text from the man sitting in a house that I was paying for. And what they didn't realize in that moment was that they had just declared independence from their only source of survival. If you've ever been used, underestimated, or treated like your kindness was an obligation, then this story is going to hit hard. So hit like, subscribe, and get ready because this isn't just revenge. This is what happens when someone finally stops being the safety net. My name is Elena Carter. I'm 29, and I work overnight shifts as a freight dispatch coordinator just outside Kansas City. If you've never worked nights like that, it's a strange kind of world where time doesn't exist properly, where fluorescent lights hum endlessly, screens glow in the dark, and every voice coming through your headset carries urgency, frustration, or exhaustion. Everything revolves around timing, money, and mistakes that no one can afford. I was good at it, though, because systems made sense to me. Numbers made sense and chaos didn't scare me, because I knew how to organize it, which is probably exactly why my family slowly turned me into one. That night, I was doing what I always did, juggling calls, rerouting delayed trailers, approving automatic payments from my phone without even thinking twice about it, just keeping everything moving, just making sure nothing collapsed. When the family group chat lit up, my father's message appeared cold, direct, and final. And for a second, I actually thought it had to be a mistake, like maybe it was meant for someone else. But then 3 seconds later, my mother reacted with a thumbs up, and my younger sister added a heart. And suddenly it wasn't confusion anymore, it was real. I looked down at my phone again, not at their message this time, but at the payment confirmations still open on my screen. Electric bill paid, internet active, phone plan running, truck insurance processed, pharmacy refill confirmed, all of it tied directly to my account. And that's when the reality hit me in a way words can't fully explain. They had just cut me off emotionally while still depending on me financially. Something inside me didn't explode or break the way you'd expect. It didn't even hurt right away. It just went completely still, like a switch had been flipped somewhere deep inside me. Not weak, not emotional, just done. I typed back slowly and carefully, "Great. I'll cancel the auto payments first thing tomorrow." And almost immediately my mom sent a voice note, her tone rushed and anxious as if she could still control the situation if she reacted fast enough, telling me not to be nasty and that my father was just upset. Then my sister jumped in calling me dramatic. And finally my father replied with just 2 words, "Try it." And that was it. That was the exact second everything shifted. Because I realized they genuinely believed I wouldn't follow through. They believed I still needed their approval more than they needed my money. By midnight, the group chat had turned into chaos. Messages stacking over each other, voice notes coming in nonstop. Accusations, guilt trips, emotional manipulation, all the same tactics I had been conditioned to respond to for years. But this time something was different. I wasn't scrambling to fix it. I wasn't apologizing. I wasn't trying to smooth things over. Instead, I found myself thinking about billing cycles, login credentials, due dates, and what would actually happen when all those payments stopped. I was thinking about how quiet that house would become when the invisible system I had built for them finally shut down. When I got home after 3 a.m., everything felt different. Even my small apartment felt unfamiliar, like I was seeing it clearly for the first time instead of just passing through it between shifts. I kicked off my boots, dropped my keys on the counter, and stood there in the silence. No voices, no demands, no messages expecting immediate replies, just stillness. And for a moment it almost felt uncomfortable because I wasn't used to that kind of quiet. But then I walked into the kitchen, pulled out my laptop, and opened a spreadsheet I had been avoiding for months, maybe longer, because deep down I already knew what it would show and I wasn't ready to face it. At first, none of it had looked like something was wrong. It had all felt like helping, like being a good daughter, like doing what family does for each other. My father had hurt his back and said it was temporary. My mother said the phone plan made more sense under my name. My sister promised she was just 1 semester away from finishing school. And every time there was a new expense, it came with a reason, a justification, a promise that it was temporary. But temporary turned into permanent so slowly that I didn't even notice it happening. One bill became 2, then 5, then everything. Water because my dad forgot. Internet because my mom needed it. Groceries because my sister didn't have a job yet. Insurance because my dad couldn't work without it. Pharmacy because my mom couldn't afford it one month and cried when her card got declined. And every single time I told myself I was just keeping things stable, that it was temporary, that things would get better soon. But sitting there at 3:41 in the morning, scrolling through months and months of transactions, I finally saw it for what it really was. It wasn't support. It wasn't temporary. It was a system. A system where I was the foundation, and everything else depended on me continuing to give without question. I went line by line: electric, gas, water, Wi-Fi, phone plans, insurance, tuition, groceries, streaming services I didn't even use, emergency expenses that somehow always became my responsibility. And when I finally reached the total, I had to stop because my brain refused to process it at first. 68,214.17. I said it out loud once, then again, trying to make it feel real. Because that number wasn't just money, it was time, energy, sacrifices, missed opportunities, double shifts, skipped weekends, holidays spent alone under fluorescent lights while I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. My hands started shaking, not from anger, but from clarity, because suddenly everything made sense in a way it never had before. The guilt they used on me, the pressure, the constant expectation, the way I was treated like I owed them something just for existing, it all clicked into place. They didn't see me as someone helping them. They saw me as something they were entitled to, something that would always be there no matter what. And infrastructures don't get thanked. They just get used until they stop working. But the number wasn't even the worst part. Because when I started digging deeper into the details, checking documents, cross-referencing payments, looking at things I had ignored before, I found something that changed everything. Something that made me realize I hadn't just been taken advantage of. I had been lied to on a level I never imagined. And once I saw it, there was no going back. When I started digging deeper into the documents, it wasn't some dramatic movie moment at first. It was small, almost forgettable, the kind of detail most people would scroll past without thinking twice. But something about it made me pause. It was a property tax reminder buried between email confirmations, and the name on it wasn't my father's. It referenced something called the Hayes Family Trust. I stared at it longer than I should have, reading it again and again like maybe I was missing something obvious. But the more I looked, the more wrong it felt, because my entire understanding of that house, the place I had been financially supporting for nearly 3 years, was built on one assumption: that my parents owned it. And suddenly, that assumption didn't hold anymore. A memory surfaced so sharply it felt like it had been waiting for this exact moment to come back. About a year earlier, my grandfather had asked me something casually, almost like it didn't matter. Are they still telling people they bought that house from me? At the time, I laughed it off because it sounded like one of those half-jokes older people make, something not meant to be taken seriously. But now, sitting there at nearly 4 in the morning, staring at a tax notice that didn't have my father's name anywhere on it, that question hit differently. It didn't feel like a joke anymore. It felt like a warning I had ignored. My stomach tightened as I started searching through my inbox, digging into old emails, forwarded documents, anything that might connect the dots, and that's when I found it. An old county notice that had been accidentally sent to me instead of my father. The details were clear, too clear to misunderstand. The house was never in his name. Not even partially. Not even in process. It had always remained under the Hayes Family Trust. My grandfather's trust, my mother's side of the family, not my father's. The man who had just told me not to come around, who had acted like he had authority over that house, didn't even legally own the roof over his head. I leaned back in my chair and covered my mouth. And then I laughed, not because anything was funny, but because it was the only reaction my body could produce in that moment. It was a hollow, disbelieving kind of laugh, the kind that comes when something is so absurd, so completely upside down, that your brain doesn't know how else to process it. I hadn't been supporting a struggling family trying to stay afloat. I had been funding an illusion. They got to present themselves as stable homeowners, responsible, independent, while I quietly kept everything running behind the scenes like an invisible extension cord plugged into the wall. That realization didn't just hurt. It rearranged everything I thought I understood about my place in that family. Every time I had sacrificed, every time I had said yes when I wanted to say no, every time I had worked an extra shift to cover something they temporarily couldn't handle. It wasn't building something real. It was maintaining a performance. And the worst part was that they knew. They had to know. You don't live in a house you don't own for years without being aware of it. And yet my father had still chosen to speak to me like he was the authority, like he was the one granting or removing access, like I was the one who needed to earn my place. By 4:12 a.m., I had stopped reacting emotionally and started moving with purpose. I printed every statement I could find, every payment confirmation, every record that tied me financially to that house, and I organized them in a way that felt almost mechanical, like I was back at work building a report. At 4:38, I highlighted every recurring charge in yellow, watching as the pages filled with color, each line another reminder of how much I had carried without question. At 5:05, I created a separate tab labeled Cancel First, and that simple phrase felt heavier than anything I had written all night. Because it wasn't just about stopping payments. It was about ending a system I had allowed to exist for far too long. By the time the sun started pushing through the early morning fog, I had made a decision that felt both terrifying and strangely calm. Instead of going to their house, instead of calling, instead of sending a long message trying to explain how I felt, or asking for some kind of understanding I already knew I wouldn't get, I grabbed the stack of papers, clipped them into a binder, and drove to the one person who had never made me feel like kindness was something to be exploited, my grandfather, Walter Hayes. His house sat about 25 minutes outside the city, a white farmhouse surrounded by open land, the kind of place that felt grounded in a way my life hadn't felt in a long time. When I pulled into the gravel driveway, he was already outside, pouring coffee into a travel mug like he had been expecting something, like he had sensed that something had finally broken loose. He didn't ask why I was there, didn't waste time on small talk. He just looked at my face, nodded once and said, "Bring the papers in." Sitting at his kitchen table, I told him everything, the message, the reactions, the payments, the total, the discovery about the house, and he listened without interrupting, his expression steady, focused, like he was already processing what needed to be done instead of getting caught up in how unfair it all was. When I finished, he adjusted his glasses and started going through my documents one by one, taking his time, checking details, confirming what I already suspected but hadn't fully accepted yet. After a few minutes, he stood up, walked into the adjoining room that looked more like an old office than a living space, and came back with a red file box. He placed it on the table between us and opened it, revealing folders labeled in his precise, blocky handwriting. One of them read Carter House. Even before he said anything, I knew what was inside would confirm everything. He explained it simply, without emotion, the way someone does when they've already accepted the truth long ago. The house had never left the Hayes family trust. Years back, he had allowed my parents to move in under an informal understanding that they would either purchase it gradually or pay a modest rent once they got back on their feet. They had done neither. Meetings were missed, excuses were made, promises were broken, and eventually he stopped pushing, not because he approved, but because he was tired. Family fatigue, he called it, that point where you know you're right, but continuing to fight drains more than it fixes. I looked down at the documents spread across the table and felt something settle in me, something solid and undeniable. My father hadn't just been irresponsible. He had been pretending to have control, pretending to own something he didn't, pretending that I owed loyalty to a foundation that didn't even belong to him. And I had been supporting that illusion without realizing it. When I said that out loud, my grandfather's response was immediate and sharp. "He's been acting like other people's patience belongs to him." And then he tapped the total on my spreadsheet and added, "And you've been underwriting his pride." That sentence hit harder than anything else that night, because it stripped away every excuse I had made for them and replaced it with something much simpler and much harder to ignore. I hadn't just been helping. I had been enabling, but instead of comforting me, he did something far more valuable. He gave me clarity and direction. He walked me through the trust documents, showed me the deed, explained what legal authority actually existed and what didn't. And then he said something that changed the way I approached everything that came next. He told me I didn't need another emotional argument, didn't need to go to their house and beg to be understood, because people who benefit from your silence will always call your truth cruel when you finally speak it. He told me to be clear, to document everything, to stop everything, and to let him handle the property side. No drama, no long explanations, just facts, dates, amounts, and consequences. He even suggested how to do it. Record a short video, keep my voice steady, list every payment, every cancellation, and send it without adding anything extra that they could twist into something else. As for the house, he made it very clear that the authority didn't belong to my father. It belonged to the trust, and if things escalated, he would step in directly and handle it himself. Then he looked at me in a way that made sure I actually heard what he was about to say, and he said, "Kindness without boundaries stops being kindness. It becomes permission." When I left his house that morning, I didn't feel angry the way I expected to. I felt focused. The confusion was gone. The doubt was gone. And for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about how to keep my family comfortable. I was thinking about something much more important. I was thinking about what would happen if I finally stepped aside and let them experience the weight of everything I had been carrying for them. And by the time I parked outside my workplace for my next shift, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. By the time I parked outside the dispatch center for my next shift, the decision didn't feel dramatic anymore. It felt inevitable. The kind of decision that had been building quietly for years. Layer by layer, every time I said yes when I meant no, every time I absorbed pressure that wasn't mine, every time I chose peace over truth just to avoid conflict. I turned off the engine, sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel, and noticed something strange. I wasn't shaking anymore. The anxiety that usually followed any kind of confrontation with my family wasn't there. In its place was something colder, steadier, almost clinical. I propped my phone against the dashboard, opened my spreadsheet, and hit record. No script, no rehearsal, no performance, just facts. I was still in my reflective work vest, my hair slightly damp from the rushed shower, dark circles under my eyes, no makeup, no effort to soften anything, because this wasn't about being understood emotionally anymore, it was about being clear. I started the video simply, "Since Dad says I'm on my own now, this is what that means." And then I turned the camera toward the screen and began reading. Not accusing, not yelling, just documenting. Electric bill, average amount, months covered, gas, water, internet, phone plan for 3 lines, truck insurance, tuition payments, pharmacy refills, grocery deliveries. Every line item delivered the same way I would report a delayed shipment. Steady, precise, impossible to misinterpret. I didn't rush it either. I let each number sit for a second after I said it, like I was giving the truth time to land. When I finished listing everything, I paused, took a breath, and said the only sentence that actually mattered. "Because I've been told not to contact you and not to come around. All support ends in the same spirit." I explained the timelines. Electric and gas would be transferred or terminated by Friday. Phone plans were already submitted for transfer. Truck insurance would not renew. Tuition payments were canceled. Grocery accounts were closed. Pharmacy authorizations removed. I didn't add emotion, didn't justify it, didn't soften it. I ended with, "If you need clarification, review the spreadsheet attached. Grandpa Walter Hayes will contact you regarding the property." Then I stopped recording. For a second, I just stared at the screen, thumb hovering over send, and there was a part of me, a very old, very trained part, that hesitated, that wanted to rewrite it, to make it gentler, to add something that would make it easier for them to accept, but I didn't. I pressed send exactly as it was. The video went to the family group chat with the subject line, "Since I'm on my own now." For 15 seconds, nothing happened. Absolute silence. Then my phone exploded. Messages stacked faster than I could read them, notifications piling on top of each other until the screen blurred with movement. My father's name came up first, calling me ungrateful, accusing me of trying to humiliate him. My mother followed with desperate pleas, asking me to call her before I did anything rash, as if I hadn't already spent years being the opposite of rash. My sister chimed in, saying I couldn't just send spreadsheets like that it was insane, that I was overreacting. Then the voice notes started, overlapping, chaotic, my mother crying in one, my father shouting over her in another, my sister talking so fast her words blurred together into noise. But I didn't respond. Not to any of it. Instead, I opened each account one by one and started shutting doors. Cancel auto-renew. Remove payment method. Revoke authorization. End shared access. Transfer line. Freeze card. Change password. Confirmation email. Confirmation text. Confirmation screen. Each step was deliberate, controlled, almost surgical. There was no anger in it, no drama, just a system finally refusing bad input. It was the same process I used at work when something went wrong. Isolate the issue, remove the faulty connection, stabilize the system. Only this time, the system was my life. By 11 that morning, the effects had already started. My father sent 3 furious messages because he had gone out for a side job and discovered the truck insurance had lapsed at renewal. My sister called me from an unknown number because her cosmetology portal had locked her out after the missed payment posted. My mother left a voicemail, her voice low and trembling, saying she couldn't access the pharmacy account anymore and asking why I would do this to my own mother. I listened to it once, then deleted it without responding. Because the better question wasn't why I stopped. It was why they expected me to continue after telling me I wasn't part of the family anymore. During my lunch break, while my phone kept buzzing nonstop in my bag, I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do in almost 2 years. I used my own money for my own future. It felt strange at first, almost uncomfortable, like I was breaking a rule I had internalized without realizing it existed. I paid the application fee for a 1-bedroom apartment closer to work, something I had been putting off because there was always something more urgent on their end. Then I enrolled in a supervisor certification program my company had been encouraging me to take, something I had said no to multiple times because I couldn't afford it, even though I clearly could. I had just been choosing not to prioritize myself. Finally, I opened a new savings account and named it something simple but meaningful. Peace. I transferred a portion of my direct deposit into it, watching the number settle there, untouched, reserved for me. By the end of my shift, the tone in the group chat had shifted completely. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else, something they weren't used to feeling, consequences. The last message I saw before muting the chat was from my father, and it said, "You made your point. Turn it back on." That was the moment I knew everything had changed. Not when they insulted me, not when they accused me, but when they asked for the comfort back. That's when it became clear that they finally understood I wasn't bluffing. And it made me realize something I had never fully seen before. People will call you selfish. Dramatic, ungrateful, anything they need to, as long as it keeps you in a position that benefits them. But the second your boundaries start to inconvenience them, the narrative changes. Suddenly it's not about you being wrong, it's about you being necessary again. I thought that would be the hardest part. Dealing with their anger, their accusations, their attempts to pull me back into the same role I had always played. But I was wrong. The hardest part wasn't what they said directly to me. It was what they did behind my back once they realized I wasn't coming back. 2 days later, I got a message from someone I didn't know. A woman from a nearby town who apologized for reaching out and explained that she had bought a silver charm bracelet from a resale page. She said there was an engraving inside and she wanted to know if it meant anything before she polished it off. She sent a photo, and the second I saw it, my chest tightened so hard it felt like I couldn't breathe. The engraving read, "To Mom, love, Elena." I had given that bracelet to my mother years ago after she finished radiation treatment. I bought it with my first holiday bonus, and I still remembered the way she cried when I handed it to her, the way she hugged me like it meant something. And now it had been sold online for $80. Before I could even process that, another message came in, this time from a man who had bought a vintage camera and found my name label inside the case. That camera had been mine since high school, something I had left at the family house because I didn't have space for it in my apartment. Then a third message, a leather tool bag with my father's name engraved on it being sold at a local swap meet, listed by my sister and my mother. It didn't take long for the pattern to become clear. They weren't just dealing with the loss of my financial support. They were converting everything I had ever given them into cash. I sat there on my couch, phone in my hand, staring at those images, and felt something shift again, but this time it wasn't clarity. It was something colder, something final, because it wasn't just about money anymore. It was about what that money represented. Every item they were selling wasn't just a possession, it was a memory, a moment, something I had given with intention, and they were stripping it down to a price tag like it had never meant anything beyond its resale value. And just when I thought it couldn't get worse, my cousin Erin called me and asked if I was alone. There was something in her voice that made my stomach drop before she even said anything. When I told her I was, she sent me screenshots from a private family group chat I didn't even know existed. The title alone said everything, "Protect Mom and Dad." As I scrolled through it, my hands started to go cold. My sister was telling people I had snapped and was spiraling because of work stress. My mother suggested telling others that I was drinking too much and becoming paranoid to explain the spreadsheet. An aunt recommended collecting donations through church to help with the bills I had abandoned. And my father, the same man who told me not to contact them, wrote, "Don't let anyone talk to her directly. She'll twist it." I stared at those messages for a long time, longer than I probably should have, because reading them felt like watching a version of reality being constructed in real time, one where I was the problem, one where everything I had done was erased and replaced with something easier for them to explain. And then I saw the message that finally pushed everything over the edge. My mother wrote, "If we make it about family loyalty, she'll look heartless." That was it. That was the moment the last piece of doubt disappeared. Because it wasn't confusion anymore, it wasn't misunderstanding, it was strategy. They weren't reacting emotionally, they were planning. Planning how to control the narrative, how to protect themselves, how to turn me into the villain so they wouldn't have to face what they had done. I won't pretend I felt strong in that moment. I didn't, I felt sick. I paced my apartment, my mind racing, my chest tight, and I cried once, hard and fast. Not just because of what they were doing, but because some part of me had still hoped they would choose differently. That they would realize what they had lost and try to fix it honestly. But that version of them didn't exist. Maybe it never had. For a brief moment, I almost gave in. I picked up my phone, opened the utility app, hovered over the option to restore the pharmacy payment for my mom, because that instinct to fix things, to take care of them, it doesn't just disappear overnight. It's trained into you over years, reinforced every time you're told that your value comes from what you provide. But before I could press anything, another message came through from my father. "Since you want war, don't expect us to forget it." And right after that, Erin sent 2 more screenshots. My sister had written, "Sell whatever she left here. She owes us for embarrassing Dad." And just like that, the hesitation was gone. Completely gone. Because you can forgive a lot of things. Misunderstandings, mistakes, even hurtful words said in anger. But when people start rewriting reality, when they start turning your kindness into a weapon against you, when they start selling pieces of your life like they were never yours to begin with, that's not something you fix. That's something you walk away from. That was the moment I stopped thinking about fixing anything and started thinking about ending it properly. Not with shouting, not with a public meltdown, but with something far more uncomfortable for them, truth that couldn't be twisted. I didn't go on social media, didn't write a long emotional post, didn't try to defend myself in a way that would turn into more drama. Instead, I sat down at my kitchen counter, opened my laptop, and drafted one email. Just one. It wasn't sent to everyone, only to the relatives who actually mattered, the ones who had already been pulled into the story my parents were trying to build. I kept it simple, controlled, and impossible to misinterpret. I attached 4 things: the original message from my father telling me not to contact them, the first page of my payment ledger showing the totals, the photo of the bracelet being sold, and the screenshots from that private group chat. Then I wrote a single paragraph. I told them they were free to help my parents and sister if they chose, but they should do it with the truth. I explained that for nearly 3 years I had covered recurring expenses, tuition, insurance, and medical costs, and that after being told not to come around, I ended that support. I added that false statements had been made about me, and that I would not argue publicly. I was simply providing facts. Then I hit send. The silence after that email felt different from the silence after I sent the video. That first silence had been tense, like a storm waiting to break. This one felt like something settling, like pieces finally falling into place whether anyone liked it or not. By evening, the shift had already begun. One aunt who had called me selfish just a day earlier sent a short reply saying she didn't know the full situation. Another relative reached out quietly, asking if I was okay, not accusing, not demanding, just asking. My cousin Aaron told me that the church leadership had decided not to move forward with collecting donations once they understood what was actually happening. Even a cousin who had been distant for years admitted that my father had already asked him for a loan and tried to pass it off as a temporary bank issue. For the first time since all of this started, I saw what truth could do when it wasn't begging to be believed. It didn't need to argue, didn't need to defend itself. It just stood there, steady and documented, while everything built on lies started to collapse under its own weight. It didn't feel like victory, not the loud, dramatic kind people imagine when they think about revenge. It felt quieter than that, more grounded, like something had finally been corrected after being off balance for too long. But even with that shift, the next week wasn't easy. In fact, it was probably the hardest part emotionally, because cutting off support doesn't instantly cut off attachment. I still found myself reaching for my phone to text my mom about something small, something meaningless, like a funny moment at work or a memory that randomly came back. And every time I stopped myself, there was this brief, sharp ache, like my body hadn't caught up to the reality my mind had already accepted. I still miss the idea of them, the version of family I thought I had, even if that version had never actually existed the way I believed it did. At the same time, reality was catching up to them too, and it was happening fast. My grandfather called to let me know the trust attorney had reviewed everything and was prepared to issue formal notice if my father continued pretending the house belonged to him. The phone carrier confirmed that the line transfer hadn't gone through because no one on their end could provide the required information. The insurance company sent out a lapse notice. Then one evening I received an alert from the utility system that made my stomach drop. Someone had attempted to reauthorize my old debit card through the online portal. They couldn't see the full number, but they had selected the saved profile. And it had been rejected because I had already removed authorization. I sat there staring at that notification, my phone still in my hand, and felt a slow, cold realization settle in. Even after everything, even after the message, the lies, the selling of my things, they were still trying to reach into my account and turn the system back on like nothing had changed. Like I was still theirs to use. That moment didn't make me angry the way I expected. It made me certain. There was no misunderstanding left, no room for doubt, no part of me still wondering if maybe things could be repaired with the right conversation. That door was closed, and it needed to stay closed. A few days later, I decided to go to the house to collect the rest of my belongings. I didn't go alone. My grandfather came with me, parked his truck outside, and stayed there, not stepping in, not interfering, just present enough to make it clear that I wasn't walking into that situation unsupported anymore. As soon as I stepped onto the porch, my sister opened the door with her phone already raised, camera pointed directly at me like she had been waiting for a moment she could turn into content. She told me to say hi to the internet, her tone smug, almost daring me to react. I didn't. I walked past her like the camera wasn't even there, like it didn't matter, because in that moment, it didn't. Inside, everything felt familiar and completely different at the same time. My father sat in the living room trying to look unbothered, like none of this had affected him, while my mother sat wrapped in a blanket, her eyes red, her expression carefully arranged somewhere between hurt and victimhood. That version of her used to work on me, used to trigger something automatic, something that made me step in and fix whatever was wrong. But standing there now, I could see it clearly for what it was. Not pain exactly, but a role she knew how to play. I didn't argue, didn't ask questions, didn't engage with any of it. I went straight to the hallway, grabbed the plastic bins with my handwriting on them, checked the closet, and noticed immediately that several things were missing. My winter coat, a few boxes, small personal items that didn't seem important individually, but together told a clear story. When I asked where they were, my sister shrugged like it was nothing and told me maybe I should have come around more. My father made a comment about me performing again, and for a second I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because of how predictable it all felt. Instead of responding, I set my bins by the door and pulled 3 envelopes out of my bag, placing them on the dining table. I told them they were copies, one confirming the removal of my payment authorizations, one listing the items that had been sold or were missing, and one notifying them of a meeting scheduled with Walter Hayes regarding the property. My father didn't even touch the papers at first, just insisted it was his house and that no one was dragging him into anything. I looked at him for a moment, really looked at him, and said something simple, something that finally broke through his certainty. I told him the house still belonged to my grandfather. It was subtle, but I saw it. That tiny hesitation, that brief flicker of realization before he tried to cover it with anger again. My mother started crying almost immediately, not in the same controlled way as before, but in a way that felt closer to something real, like she had known all along and could no longer pretend otherwise. My sister lowered her phone without meaning to, her confidence slipping just enough to reveal the uncertainty underneath. When my father tried to push back, saying my grandfather wouldn't do that to family, I picked up my bins and told him he might, especially now. Then I walked out without waiting for another response, without giving them anything else to work with, because for the first time, I understood something important. Not every confrontation needs to be loud to be final. Back in the truck, my grandfather didn't ask what happened, didn't need to. He just handed me a folder from the law office and told me to read the repayment option that night. When I got home, I sat on the floor surrounded by my things and opened it. And what I read wasn't complicated, but it was decisive. If they wanted more time in the house, they would have to sign a notarized agreement acknowledging what I had paid, agreeing to repay it over time, and stop using my name to manipulate others. Otherwise, eviction proceedings would move forward. That same night, something else happened, something that had nothing to do with them but everything to do with me. I accepted a promotion I had been putting off for over a year. Operations planner, day shift, better pay, better hours. I signed the offer letter and realized that for the first time in a long time, my life wasn't being shaped around someone else's crisis. It was finally moving forward on its own. And as I sat there in my apartment, looking at that signed document, I understood something clearly. I hadn't destroyed my family. I had simply stopped holding it together by myself. Saturday morning arrived colder than usual, the kind of sharp, clear cold that makes everything feel more real whether you're ready for it or not. The sky was bright, almost unforgiving, and as I drove out to my grandfather's farmhouse, there was no anxiety left in me, no racing thoughts, no second-guessing. Just a quiet understanding that whatever happened next would finally close a chapter I had been stuck inside for far too long. When I walked into his office, Everything was already prepared with the kind of precision that only comes from someone who has spent a lifetime dealing with facts instead of feelings. The trust deed was laid out, the ledger of my payments neatly organized, printed copies of the messages, the screenshots, the inventory list, and the repayment agreement all placed in front of the chairs where my parents and sister would soon sit. It didn't feel like a family meeting. It felt like accountability had finally been scheduled. When they walked in, I almost didn't recognize them, not physically, but in the way they carried themselves. The anger that had filled their messages earlier in the week had faded into something heavier, something slower. My sister's usual confidence was gone, replaced by a kind of nervous energy she couldn't hide. My mother looked smaller, her posture slightly collapsed inward, like the weight of everything had finally started to settle on her shoulders. And my father, the man who had always spoken the loudest, walked in trying to hold on to authority that no longer had anything backing it. They sat down without arguing, which told me more than anything they could have said. My grandfather didn't offer comfort, didn't soften the moment. He simply told them to sit and began. He started with the house, his voice steady and direct, explaining that the property remained under the Hayes family trust, that no transfer had ever been completed, no purchase finalized, and no consistent rent paid. He made it clear that any claim of ownership was false. When my father tried to interrupt, my grandfather raised his hand just slightly, not aggressively, but with enough authority to stop him completely, and told him to listen first because he had done enough talking on borrowed ground. That line hung in the room longer than anything else because it stripped away the illusion my father had been holding on to. Then my grandfather nodded toward me, and it was my turn. I didn't stand, didn't try to make it dramatic. I just opened the ledger and spoke calmly, the same way I had in the video. I stated the total amount I had paid over the past 31 months. Over $68,000 covering utilities, insurance, tuition, groceries, medical costs, and everything else they had relied on. I explained that I had done it because I believed I was helping my family through a difficult time. And then I reminded them of what had happened. The message telling me not to contact them, not to come around, that I was on my own, and how I had simply taken them at their word. My sister started crying before I even reached the conditions, her voice breaking in a way that might have affected me once, but now it just sounded late, like an apology that had missed its moment. I slid the repayment agreement across the table and explained the terms clearly. They would have 30 days before eviction proceedings began. They would vacate the house without damage. They would sign a notarized agreement acknowledging the support I had provided and committing to repay it over time. And they would stop using my name to manipulate others for money or sympathy. I added one more condition, that if they continued spreading false information about me, every document in that room would be shared with everyone they had misled. My father reacted exactly how I expected at first, slamming his hand against the table and accusing me of trying to destroy the family, his voice rising as if volume could still control the situation. But I didn't raise mine, didn't match his energy. I just looked at him and said something simple, something I had already accepted long before walking into that room. I told him I wasn't destroying anything. I had just stopped financing a version of family that only existed when I was being used. That was the first moment he didn't have an immediate response, and the silence that followed said more than any argument could. My mother broke down then, not the controlled version of crying she had used before, but something more real, asking where they were supposed to go in 30 days, asking how I could do this to them. And for the first time, the answer came without hesitation, without guilt, without the instinct to fix it. I told her I didn't know, because that was the exact position they had put me in when they told me I was on my own. That silence afterward felt heavier than anything else in the room, because it forced them to sit with the reality of what they had done. When I turned to my sister and mentioned the items she had sold, the bracelet, the camera, the things that had meant something to me, she couldn't meet my eyes. She tried to explain it away at first, tried to frame it as just getting by, but even she knew it wasn't that simple. At some point, it stopped being about survival and became a choice, a reflection of who she was willing to be when things got difficult. My grandfather reinforced everything without raising his voice, reminding my father that he had years to make things right and had chosen not to because I had made it easy for him not to. Eventually, the room went quiet again, the kind of silence that only happens when there's nothing left to argue, nothing left to deny. My father tried one last approach, shifting from anger to something closer to pity, saying he had been under pressure, but my grandfather cut that off immediately, pointing out that everyone faces pressure and most people don't solve it by relying on their children while pretending it's their right. That was the moment everything fully settled, not just for me, but for them too. I signed my part of the agreement and placed the pen on the table, telling them that from that point forward, they would learn how to live without my money. And I would learn how to live without being valued only when I was useful. One by one, they signed. My mother first, her hands shaking, my sister after her, and finally my father. Slower, more reluctant, but still signing because for the first time there were consequences he couldn't talk his way out of. They left without another argument, without trying to reconnect, without pretending anything could go back to how it was. And that was the clearest sign of all that something real had changed. 30 days later, everything followed through exactly as planned. The house was emptied and returned to the trust, eventually leased to a new family who paid their bills on time and didn't treat stability like something they were entitled to. My father moved into a smaller rental and started taking actual work instead of relying on excuses. My mother found a job and months later sent the first repayment. My sister finished her schooling the hard way, balancing work and responsibility without anyone left to carry her through it. And me, I stepped into the life I had been postponing for years. I started my new position, moved into a better apartment closer to work, rebuilt my savings, and experienced something I hadn't felt in a long time, peace that wasn't constantly at risk of being interrupted. I slept through the night without emergency calls, without guilt, without the pressure of being responsible for everyone else's problems. People sometimes ask me what the turning point was, what the moment of revenge really looked like. And the truth is, it wasn't loud or dramatic. It was one decision, one boundary that I finally refused to move. I stopped paying for disrespect. That was it. And once I did that, everything built on that imbalance had to stand on its own, and most of it couldn't. I don't hate them. That's something I had to come to terms with. What I feel is something quieter than that, something more grounded. I just don't trust them with my peace anymore, and that's a difference that changes everything. Not everyone who shares your blood deserves unlimited access to your time, your energy, or your sacrifice. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and even for them, is to step back and let reality teach the lessons you've been shielding them from. The night my father told me I was on my own, he thought he was taking something away from me, but what he really did was give me something I didn't know I needed. He gave me a reason to stop carrying a weight that was never meant to be mine in the first place. And once I let it go, everything in my life finally had room to move forward. If this story hit you in any way, if you've ever been in a situation where your kindness was mistaken for obligation, then take a second to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. Because these stories aren't just about revenge, they're about recognizing your worth. And if you want more stories like this, real, raw, and unforgettable, make sure you subscribe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't getting even, it's finally choosing yourself.